Okay, nature lovers, this is part 2 of our nutrient cycles video series from Time Life Books. This one's free, and you can get this and many other fantastic videos for the low price of $9.95 each. Just look for the address at the end to send your money. Okay, but seriously, folks, carbon cycles, second of our major cycles that we need to understand. You should understand water cycle by now, and if you don't, go back to the previous video. But let's talk about carbon. Carbon is a nice little atom, 6 protons, 6 neutrons, important to life, maybe the most important thing to life. Why is it important? Well, carbon's important because it's the major component of organic compounds. What the heck are organic compounds? Well, you've got carbohydrates, you've got lipids, you've got proteins, and you have nucleic acids, and they all require carbon to be made. Okay? So this is one of those things that when the organisms have glucose, which is a result of photosynthesis, or the food chain, then they take that glucose and they change it through a series of chemical reactions into carbohydrates, which is glucose, but other forms of carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids to be used in the bodies of these different organisms. Not just animals, all organisms. Okay, that's why it's important. So let's give you a little bit of kind of, what's the right word? Nomenclature. CO2. Nope, that's wrong. Never mind. Thank you for playing. Here we go. Carbon dioxide is CO2. Okay, so when you see me write CO2, I'm writing carbon dioxide. Capiche? Okay, I don't hear any objections. Here's one more. CaCO3. That should have been lower, sorry. Calcium carbonate. Okay, calcium carbonate is found a lot of times in shells of sea creatures and found in our bones, and a lot of bones. So those are two kind of major chemical symbols you might need. If you didn't get it, pause, go back, get it. I'll wait. But not too long. Okay, so how's this whole crazy cycle start? Remember, again, it's a cycle. It starts anywhere on this whole thing I'm telling you. But I'm going to start up here with, I'm going to make this the focus. Atmospheric CO2 gas. Okay, this is what's out in the atmosphere. Now, here's the first way it can go. So, it rains. And when it rains, then the carbon dioxide dissolves into the water. Okay? And you know what? I've already messed this stupid thing up. That really goes here. What happens before that? Let me look. Oh, here it is. It dissolves into rainwater. Okay. Pretty basic. Once that dissolves in rainwater, a lot of times it makes a formation of that's called carbonic acid, but I don't think you have to go crazy on that. That's your acid rain, right? Sulfuric acid, carbonic acid. Sulfuric acid is a lot worse than carbonic acid. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. This dissolves into rainwater. So the carbon dioxide is now still carbon dioxide, but it's in the water. It's dissolved in the water, and that dissolved carbon dioxide goes into lakes and oceans. Do you have that? Okay, good. Now, let's take this out. I'm just going to kind of take a little bit at a time out and bring in something else. Okay, so if we put that up, kind of up here, go with it. The CO2 dissolves in lake and oceans. What happens next? Well, a couple things. One of the things is the CO2, which can be dissolved, which is dissolved here, is used by aquatic plants. And if it's undissolved, it's used by land plants and algae and so forth for photosynthesis. Okay, and we know all about photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide and water combine together to make glucose. Fundamental process for life, right? Okay, hang on just a second now. So the real question is once this carbon, which has now changed form, it's no longer a gas, which was what CO2 was, it's no longer a gas, it's now a solid glucose molecule, okay? So what happens to it? Well, it's eaten. And we've talked about that. This is the food chain part of the show, right? This is what that's all about in ecosystems. Is this carbon now goes and is eaten by consumers. And it's a solid. It's in the form of glucose. Okay, so let's clean this up a little bit. Hang on. Okay, so now that I've cleaned it up, so our plants, our algae are eaten by consumers, and so now it's out there in the whole deal. What happens here? Lots of stuff. One of the first things is that organisms breathe some of it. Okay, they just, you're doing it right now. Let out a breath. You're doing this. The organism's breath, breathe. What? Breathe. There's an E. Sorry, Eileen. Some of it out as CO2, which is released to the atmosphere, and the cycle starts over. See, it goes back up here. Let's go there, and the cycle starts over. Okay, but most of it's kind of locked up in those organic compounds, the lipids, the carbohydrates, the proteins, and nucleic acids, and in the organism. And when the organism dies, one of three things has to happen. One of them is as decomposers kind of break them apart, the CO2 is released to the air again. So that's still there. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that, the organism is buried. It dies, it becomes buried. And when it's buried, one of two things happen. One, it either can become part of sedimentary rock, like limestone, which we're surrounded by here in the Ozarks. We have limestone everywhere. And that limestone is primarily composed of shells of organisms. The carbon is in the form of calcium carbonate that I showed you earlier, CaCO3. And so it can be locked up in that sedimentary rock. So it's definitely a solid form now. It's changed from glucose to calcium carbonate. Or what's the other thing that can happen? Hang on, we ought to put an arrow to make it full, right? All right. There's that. No. Okay, or the third thing that can happen is decomposition, which we kind of talked about here, but some decomposition underground plus pressure plus heat equals, that should be an equals, fossil fuel. Okay, in fossil fuels, it's changed from kind of our original CO2 through these process of decomposition, pressure, and heat. It's changed it into a hydrocarbon. Hydrocarbon takes lots of different forms. One example, though, is ethanol. And here's the basic chemical symbol for ethanol. CH3, CH2OH. Lots of carbon locked up in there. There's 2 carbon atoms for every ethanol. So we get a lot of carbon there, and there's tons of types of hydrocarbons. But these hydrocarbons essentially are what we call now fossil fuels. See right there? Fossil fuels. Okay, so what happens to this? Well, why don't I start with this right here, this organism that's buried in God. So we're going to bring fossil fuels back in a minute. But right now, let's see, hang on. Did you miss me? I thought you might. Okay, so what happens to this crazy sedimentary rock? Well, here's what happens there. It's really cool. And this, of course, is part of the rock cycle for all you sports fans that maybe studied rocks at some point in your life. Basically, the sedimentary rock kind of gets pushed deeper and deeper and deeper as layers build up on top of it. At some point, it might become metamorphic rock like marble, where it's hot but not so hot that it melts, but it bends and so forth and changes. But if it goes all the way and it melts, it becomes magma. And this magma is kind of circulates below the crust of the earth. But sometimes, kind of like a pimple, right, that magma comes up to the surface of the earth and erupts all over the earth. Okay? It's always before prom. Am I right? I know. Anyway, when this lava comes out of a volcano, there's still carbon trapped in the lava, and as it cools, it's trapped into a new rock form called igneous rock. There's your nickel tour of the rock cycle. But some of this, and this is the part we really want to pay attention to, some of that carbon that was in that sedimentary rock is now released as carbon dioxide gas back to the atmosphere, and then the whole cycle starts over. See a little theme here? So it starts over. Maybe it goes the same way, or maybe it gets eaten by a plant and exhaled. Who knows? But that carbon starts the cycle over. Okay, that's one possibility here. Now, what's the other possibility? Let me clean this up. Wait. Okay, here's our old friend fossil fuels again. So what happens to this? Well, here's an arrow. Fossil fuels. Can I do this? Yeah. Fossil fuels are burned in factories, power plants, and cars, and that process of combustion, which is actually its own chemical process, it transforms all the carbon that was locked as ethanol here, for example, it changes it. And a lot of that carbon changes back to CO2 gas. What do you think happens here? Wait for it. You're right! It's released to the atmosphere and the cycle starts over. All right. Well, if you notice on your notes, I ask you, or maybe not, but if you look at the note page on the website, I challenge you to use all of this information and turn it into a nice graphic organizer that explains all the steps of the carbon cycle. Can you do it? We'll see. Maybe that's what we'll do in class. We'll see. Anyway, if you have questions, let me know. I think, wait just a second, and we'll finish up real quick. Wait just a second, we'll do the nitrogen cycle. Okay, I'm back. I know you're very excited. Okay, so let's move to the next one. No more carbon cycle. Now we're doing the that's the nitrogen. Hang on, I'm going to type this. There we go, the nitrogen cycle. This is the last of our 3 major cycles. What I would ask you to be able to do is to take all this information I'm about to vomit at you and turn it in. Ooh, here's that vomit. Sorry. Turn it into a nice graphic organizer that explains the whole enchilada. So what I'd do is I'd take notes first and then try and transfer those notes over to a graphic organizer showing me really, ultimately, you should be able to show me the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the carbon cycle. Okay, so here we go. Why in the world is nitrogen a big deal? Who gives a flip? Well, here it is. It's essential for the formation of amino acids. Put simply, no amino acids, no proteins. So, well, no proteins. Most of the structures in our organisms and most of the processes that happen in our organisms stop or disappear. It's not just in animals, it's in plants and fungi. Every living organism, if it doesn't have the amino acids and the proteins, most of the stuff just doesn't work. Okay? If you don't remember how proteins affect the body, just think about cells and how many, just the 3 little proteins that are in the cell membrane that are so crucial to the existence of the cell. If you don't know about that, come talk to me. Okay, so that's why it's important, is really the formation of amino acids. Okay, now here's some little things you might want to know about nitrogen. Nitrogen gas, which we do N2, 2 atoms of nitrogen make up 1 nitrogen gas molecule. It makes up 78% of the atmosphere. But here's the catch. Most of the organisms can't use this form of nitrogen. What? Yeah, I know. It's a bummer. They can't use the nitrogen that's right there in front of them. They need help. They need to convert it into a form they can use. What can they use? They can use ammonia, they can use nitrites, and they can use nitrates. And I won't go into all the boring details about that, but those are 3 forms they can use, and often do use. And so we've got all this gas. What do we need to change it? Well, we need the help of a group of bacteria. There's one group of organisms that can change nitrogen gas into a usable form, ammonia, and they're called the Nitrogen Fixing Bacteria. The NFB, you down with me? That's all I got, really. It's late. Give me a break. All right, so they have to have the nitrogen fixing bacteria to turn this nitrogen gas into ammonia. There's other ways it can happen. Actually, lightning can fix nitrogen too, but there's not enough lightning to do enough nitrogen for the planet. So lightning, although it works and it counts and it should be on your diagram, it's not a primary source. It's kind of a secondary source. Okay, so we have our nitrogen fixing bacteria. They change it. And also humans change it. And they do this they just chemically do it. They take the nitrogen gas. We figured out the chemical process. We turn it into fertilizer, which is great. That helps our plants grow, and that adds to the cycle. But as typical of many folks, we use too much. And we put it all over our fields and on our lawns and in our gardens in too high amounts, and all that nitrogen washes away in the fertilizer into our rivers and streams, and that just totally jacks up the balance of nutrients in that ecosystem, and it goes crazy, goes haywire. Okay, that's no good, and it takes a while to fix, maybe a long time to fix, and in the process, a lot of life can die. So it's important to kind of manage your fertilizer well. All right, so here's what we've talked about. We've talked about three things. We've talked about how bacteria fix that nitrogen to a usable form. We talked about how lightning fixes it to a usable form. And we also talked about how humans do it. But why do we give a flip? You may not, but I do, and that's what matters. I care. But anyway, why is all this nitrogen fixation important? Well, let me tell you. Because plants use it to make amino acids. We talked about that. Humans don't take that. Fungus doesn't take that. Dogs don't take it. Cats don't take it. They don't turn it into amino acids. So where do they get it? They steal it. How do they do it? They eat them. That's just sick. Okay, just kidding. Here's the deal. Just like we get energy by eating each other, that's how we move this nitrogen along. And that's how we get some of the amino acids. So I might eat a nice salad for lunch. I know Eileen's saying Epps ain't never seen a vegetable in his life, but still we'll go with it. So I eat a salad, and I break down the amino acids in the salads, reorganize them, take that nitrogen, make my own amino acids for some part. Some I use directly from the salad. Recombine it, make my own proteins. Okay? And then let's say I get eaten by a bear. That bear takes me, breaks down my amino acids. Some of them it keeps, some of them it breaks down and uses the nitrogen to use in its own amino acids, puts together, makes its own proteins. You get the idea. The bear dies, a fungus grows on it. What's it do? Oh yeah, it breaks it down, it takes the amino acids, some of them it uses for itself, some it breaks down to get the nitrogen and to make its own amino acids, to make its own proteins, you get the idea. Okay, that's why it's important. And they pass it along. Now, but it passes. Three things also happen here. We have our decomposing bodies, we urinate, and we take a dump. I meant a bowel movement. But anyway, when that happens, what happens to all that stuff? There's a ton of nitrogen in our feces, in our urine, in our bodies. What happens to it? Well, that's where our friends, where'd it go? Aha! A different group of bacteria called the Denitrifying Bacteria. They do the opposite of the nitrogen-fixing bacteria. These guys take our nitrates that are in our feces, in our urine, in our bodies, and they take those nitrates and they chemically change them to nitrogen gas. And that nitrogen gas is then released back into the atmosphere, and voila, see, keeps up to 78%, and voila, the cycle starts over. It's the circle of life. I don't really know that tune as well as I'd hoped. Anyway, maybe Kaylin can help me with that. All right. So the cycle starts over, and everything goes again. So really what you need to know is you need to know what changes nitrogen gas to usable forms of ammonia, nitrate, nitrite. You need to understand why this nitrogen is important for the body, and how does that nitrogen and those amino acids get passed through the food chain, really. And then what happens with the waste of all of that after it's eaten. How does it go back to being nitrogen gas? If you can turn all that into a diagram, you are golden. Okay. Do you have any questions? Well, I can't hear you. Don't ask me right now. Look, if you have questions tomorrow, ask me in class. Okay. Have a great night. Ciao.